Thank you for joining us today for this exciting advisory council meeting for Packaging EPR. Just to go over our agenda today, we're going to do roll call. Then, as requested from the last meeting, we've kind of developed a presentation which goes over the high-level differences between items that we modeled in our needs assessment and what came out in the legislation. Then we are going to be having a discussion on what do we need to do to clarify in regulation, because we're going to be developing that very soon, and we have a important due date of producer registrations on July 1st, 2026. So we're going to have a pretty accelerated schedule for getting the information that we need for regulation, including the materials list, which is part of that, registration. So I think most of our meetings are going to be focused on that going forth, at least in the short term. And then, as always, we will end with public comment. And again, if you're on I saw Shannon put in the chat, if you are on the advisory council, if you could just put your name in the chat for roll call. And then Sarah is actually going to be giving a presentation. Any questions on? All right, without further ado, Sarah, you can start your presentation.
Can everyone hear me? Okay. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm going to be going first through some of the comparisons between the model in the needs assessment and SB 901, and then I'll be going over a proposed timeline that is based off of the conversations that we had in our last advisory council meeting. So, to begin, looking at the needs assessment, commercial access was one of the operational characteristics that was considered for a potential future EPR program. And so looking at this left-hand box in gray, we see some of the sectors that were included that were assumed to have high potential quantities of paper and packaging materials. And so some of those sectors included were retail trade, finance and insurance, real estate, administrative and support and waste management, educational services, arts and entertainment and recreation, and accommodation and food services. And these are all commercial entities that would receive curbside recycling services under EPR. In SB 901, rather, a covered entity includes a list that is more expansive than what's provided on this slide, but I highlighted the non-residential pieces that are covered entities under SB 901, and that includes a public or non-public kindergarten, childcare and childcare center, etc. Basically, these two first bullet points are going to correspond with that educational services piece that was modeled in the needs assessment. And I do want to note that the educational services sector was included 2,245 businesses out of a total of 77 around 78,000 businesses, and that comes out to about 3% of that total. However, also included in SB 901 are public buildings owned and operated by state or local government, and so that can account for some more of those covered entities. So moving on to the actual material that was discussed. Yes, Peter, I see that you have your hand raised.
Yeah, just a quick question.
Yeah.
For public building owned and operated by the state or local government, is that further defined, or is there intent that's meant there? So the state and the local government are going to operate public works departments, they're going to operate wastewater treatment facilities, they're going to operate a whole bunch of entities that are more like akin to a manufacturing or industrial process, as well as public facing buildings. Is there an intent as to what is meant to be captured or not?
So
Yeah.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
I can jump in on this. So that's something that we're going to have to develop in regulation, which is why the second part of our conversation is, what do we need to clarify in regulation? And does it include what you're talking about, things that may or may not be more like, I think you said manufacturing or something like that. I forget the term you used. But those are some things that we're going to have to find in regulation to kind of put the bounds around the scope of this, which is the whole point of regulation too, is because sometimes statute doesn't necessarily is intended to be a little bit more high level, and you kind of clarify that through regulation and then further through guidance. And then
oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and as well, I'll let Chaz go because I think he's first, and then I'll get to Martha's point.
So, just a quick question. It talks about commercial entities that would receive curbside recycling services. Since many of these entities already do and already have their own contractual mechanisms for selling their recyclables, will that contractual power be interfered with by EPR?
So on that, so in the law, it says that the counties and local governments have control of their, I'm paraphrasing this, so they can choose who they want to contract with. I think the question here is whether or not it's eligible for, are those costs being covered by EPR?
All right.
And then I
yeah.
did see that Martha had a comment in there. So include, so when we look at that, it does mean, oh, I saw Shannon already answered it, but it would mean include but not limited to. That's how we generally interpret that. And so there could be some other items that are potentially added in regulation or clarified or whatnot. But so that answers that question. And Shannon,
right.
did you have something you want to?
I just wanted to clarify, Scott answered a follow-up question that says, would that not limited to then have to be explicitly added in regulations? And what I was going to just refer to is, unless something is explicitly excluded in law or in statute or in regulation, then it has the potential to be included.
And there's some bounds around that. And so sometimes, say we're doing inspections or something like that, and we find a new scenario, then we would have to take that to our attorneys, what's reasonable, stuff like that. So there, it could be an iterative process as we start to roll this out. Scott?
Thanks. So in the regs, you would have to add parks or park offices or something like that, and not government buildings, not office buildings or something. You'd have to say that in the regs because it wasn't.
Well, no, the regulations can provide clarity, but
Right.
they're not mandated for us to report what the clarification is.
Okay, so I'm sorry. In this particular instance with the government buildings question, right? If you get to the point where you clarify that you mean the parks, the public facing parks, but not the office buildings where government employees work, then you have to somehow put that in the, you have to somehow clarify that in the regs, either in the inclusive or the exclusive things that you mean to not include.
Well, I think the government buildings are already included. I think that was on the previous slide.
Right, unless you want to leave out the places where, you know, the offices where. Okay.
Because at minimum, it would be those government buildings, but other things like parks, wastewater treatment plants, stuff like that, we would have to see, again, have a conversation with our attorneys as we're going through the rulemaking process. We would obviously get public comment on those. There's going to be a public participation process with this where we would have to address all comments that come to us. So, so this is, there's going to be a little bit of back and forth to this, and there'll be plenty of opportunities for the advisory council and the public to provide
Yep.
comment on these items as well.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to covered material. In the needs assessment, commercial material tonnages associated with those commercial sectors on the previous page were included in the modeling effort. And it's assumed that there's an increase in source separated OCC and paper specifically. And in SB 901, it is notable that packaging specifically includes language around personal non-commercial use, and that exempt materials. So firstly, that is how packaging is defined. When we're looking at the exemptions which are not covered, that includes materials that producers distribute to another producer that are used to contain a product and distributed to commercial businesses or entities. And again, not introduced to a person other than that commercial business or entity. And so there are some more constraints present in the law. Or sorry, excuse me, not the law. Has not been signed yet in this bill. And then the last thing that I am going to highlight is that these are some of the exemptions that are in SB 901 that were explicitly spelled out that were included in the modeling effort. So they were not exempt at the time this draft of the bill was written. This had already been completed, and so some of those include newspaper, newsprint, some magazines as specified in the bill's language, books, infant formula. Long-term storage was not specifically considered in the modeling effort, and neither were unsafe and sanitary paper products. And then finally, hazardous and flammable products were actually considered to some degree in the modeling effort, so household hazardous waste was not included, which is in alignment with the bill's language. So I'm going to move on from here. Yes,
Sorry,
Peter, go ahead.
just a question. So I'm just trying to understand. So the needs assessment included, are we saying that these were included in the needs assessment?
Yes, these were included in the needs assessment. These
So
were
the needs assessment included
out
toilet
the
paper?
calculations. So I might,
So I would say, so we based it off of, so we get reported to us what goes to a landfill. So if toilet paper was not going to a landfill, it would not be included, if that makes sense. That generally gets managed through the sewage system.
Okay. But paper towels, I think is what you're saying. Paper towels potentially, if they would have been included in the model work.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's why the waste sort was so important, was so that we could kind of figure out what those proportions were.
Okay. And by long-term storage, we mean that totes and like a case for a power drill or something like that would have been included in the modeling for the needs assessment.
So this was a last minute addition to the SB901. And when I was listening to the testimony, well, I don't know if it was testimony, it was one of the delegates, I believe, brought it up. The conversation was around like crayon boxes, how that was those tended to store crayons for longer than 5 years. So it's that last exemption that was added. Although on one of these websites for that produces crayons, I don't know if that's trademarked actually. I mean, there is some language on these are crayons for like 1-year-olds, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds. So is the intent really the storage is going to be greater than 5 years, or do you have to upgrade your crayons as your child grows or something like that? So I mean, that's something that we're going to be looking at as well.
Okay.
And that exemption, it is as determined by the department. So again, through regulation, we're going to have to develop a process for producers to submit an application for something to be considered under this particular exemption.
all right. So I am going to be moving on next to the timeline section of this presentation. So I do want to pause here and just ask if there are any questions about this section first before I move on. Okay, great. So next is the timeline, which we discussed in our last meeting. And so this is just a draft timeline put together based off of the comments from that meeting. These are not necessarily the final, so the dates on here in bold are the dates that were actually in the legislation, and the unbolded dates are dates that were added based on that conversation that are very much subject to change, but that it would be great to have some input on. And so some of the things that we did included moving the draft regulations and statewide list of covered materials a lot earlier in this process. I think the original date was in 2027, but we recognized, or we discussed in the last meeting, that would be needed for some of the later occurring pieces here. And so I'm just going to leave this up here for a minute, and I'll distribute this, or Bradley will distribute this for everyone to think about. But if anyone has any comments now, feel free to share. And Chaz, I see that you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Chaz, you are on mute.
We discussed at the last meeting the issue of the date for reimbursement and the date for when service providers register, with reimbursement in the law being July 21st, starting the reimbursement of, July 1st of 2028, which is the same time the PRO submits its plan. How is that going to be rectified?
Chaz, would you mind repeating that one more time? I'm so sorry.
Yeah, we discussed at the previous meeting the legislative requirement that reimbursement begin on July 1st, 2028, which is the same day that the PRO submits the plan to MDE, and then service providers registering on January 1st of 2029. How will those dates be rectified?
Okay.
Chaz, just to clarify, I think you're referring to page 34, line 21 through 33, right?
Not looking at the law.
Oh, okay. Well, that's where it talks about at least 50% of the costs
Yeah,
are
correct.
reimbursed, 75 to 90%. I mean, that's something that we're going to have to take a look at because the plan isn't approved at that point. And so we would need to take that back to our leadership and attorneys on how to handle that. And we're taking notes on all these things, and we're kind of getting into the next part of the agenda anyways. So, which will be helpful for us when we start to draft those regulations.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Scott.
Well, I can wait. It's about the planning and the time and the dates and a lot of, I was going to talk about the same thing Chaz was. So if you want us to wait until the later part of the agenda, I can hold it till then.
Kelly?
This may also be something that we talk about with the regulations, but it seems like an important date for this timeline would be the date by which producers may not sell unless they have a plan on file, because that's specified on page 28. That's section 92505B3 that says there's a date established in regulations by which producers may not sell. So it's not necessarily the same date that there's a plan on file.
Right.
Yeah.
It could align with the date of the registration also. So that would have to be put in regulation as well.
Okay. If there are no other questions, I'm going to end this presentation and hand it back over to Bradley.
All right. Thank you, Sarah, for putting together that presentation. And Scott, I just saw your comment. We can take that into consideration. All right. So for this next part, again, we're going to be, and just to let folks know, we've developed I want to say 95% covered materials list at this point. It wasn't quite ready for distribution before this meeting, but we're hoping to get it out, a draft out by next meeting. I think we were lucky that we had other states to look at, which provided inspiration for most of the materials out there. We've also been visiting some various retail establishments across the state. We're planning some more and to try and identify packaging and paper products that are, let's say, interesting, that may have not necessarily been on may have not been on one of the lists in the other states. So I think we've been to like maybe, and when I say we, it's my staff, have been to like 3 or 4 retail establishment across a whole bunch of different sectors, just trying to get the material types on the margins. So, and then we're also going to be looking at some online stuff as well to try and come up with that draft cover materials list, and we're hoping to get it to this group in the coming months. Any questions on that? Yeah, and to Martha's comment, we'll take if someone on here on this call sees something and has a question on that, because we are finding some interesting packaging types and paper products out there that so those are just going to have to be addressed when we get to the plan, and how are they in scope? Are they in scope? Are they not in scope? And stuff like that. If you see something out there and you want to send it to us, we can add it to our list of things that we are considering as well. So, yeah, Peter?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, obviously we're going through this process in 2 states right now as we speak, and allocating into categories. We're getting lots of questions from producers, so more than happy to sit down with the department to sort of walk through, because we have detailed definitions that fit under each of those categories.
Yeah, and when we yeah, I think that would be good. We would also want to look at like what all the states are doing in terms of definitions, and then kind of, because we're finding some variability between the states, and there's some better descriptions on the materials than others, so that clarity can sometimes help also. So yeah, happy to have that conversation. Okay, all right. So for this next item, I was thinking about going through SB 901, and because I'm sure there's a lot of thoughts throughout this law, things that we need to clarify, and my team will be taking notes on what those items are, and then we can make sure that we are addressing them through and trying to incorporate those comments as necessary through when we're drafting regulations. Shannon, you had a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you if you wouldn't mind making that a little bit larger so that everyone can see it for visibility purposes. And if anyone is having visibility issues, you can see the link to this document in the chat.
All right. So the first part is really just going over department authorities right here. Review and approve plan and annual reports submitted to us. The next part talks about the needs assessment. So, which is in 2034, but I think it's helpful to have this conversation. This isn't, a lot of what is in here is the same or very similar to the things in the previous needs assessment that the department was required to conduct. I guess the question is when we do the needs assessment in 2034, what things would we have liked to have seen in the needs assessment? What were some potential data gaps? And then we can have those notes on hand. Martha?
Yeah. I was pretty frustrated with this section because what you really need after 10 years is an independent evaluation of how the program's working. Not just another needs assessment that was identical in scope to something 10 years earlier. And I'm just wondering if there's any way in regulation you can weave in to this an evaluation, an external evaluation to see how it could work better, what's working well and what's not working well. That's not addressed in this needs assessment. In fact, I would have advocated for that every 5 years, but 10 years is good, would be fine. And I'm wondering if any other states have an independent evaluation in there, given that these are all new ideas being practiced for the first time and not even on the ground yet. I mean, if they were thinking at all about checking the overall operation of the program.
Yeah, that's something that we can definitely take a look at that. Generally, if we want to add something like when we were saying including, someone, I think Martha, that was actually you that brought up that when we see language like this in that says including, there's opportunities to potentially add on the scope in the RFP for that. So those might be areas where we can potentially add things as well.
Thanks.
Scott?
Yes, Martha, typically the pro has to report every 5 years on its performance towards its goals, and that includes a lot of the assessment of how they're, what barriers they've hit and stuff like that. But I understand if you're looking for an independent evaluation as well. But there is a mechanism. I think Peter would probably be able to. I'm not sure it's in every state, but I think a lot of the states include at least some sort of reporting about how the pro is headed towards meeting its goals.
Right. That's a self-evaluation. That's a self-evaluation. That's not like you said, it's not an independent evaluation.
Well, it is, but it's informed by.
Both.
Yeah.
The self-evaluation is very useful. I come from evaluation. It's very useful, but it's very important also to have an external check on that, to look at aspects that may have been overlooked.
I understand.
And if I'm recalling correctly, I think there was somewhere on here that it says at any time the department may request an evaluation. And I don't know if it was independent or I'm not recalling the legislation at this point, and I don't know if it was specific to financial too, but we can get to that as well. But there is some language in the law that I think gives us some ability to do what you're asking for. And then again, the plan is submitted every 5 years. And then, so there's going to be opportunities for the council to comment on that on a more frequent basis. Peter, you had a comment, question?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I guess the language here doesn't necessarily reflect the rest of the legislation, right? So it talks about recyclable materials. It doesn't talk about covered materials. Again, to me, this seems like just a broader assessment of what's actually happening in the waste system. I don't know if there's a need to be more specific, if they're looking for that third-party assessment. I think the language needs to be more specific.
Yeah, and the needs assessment for the one that we just conducted, the language in there was by county, by material, so not necessarily at packaging, although we did drill down into packaging. We had a whole section on packaging and paper products. All of our modeling was based off of packaging and paper products, although we did use the waste sort to kind of take a broader look as well. And there's already been some other laws that have been referencing this assessment that didn't necessarily have to do with paper packaging as well, packaging or paper products as well. So I think that it's been useful in those other items also. All right. Okay, any other questions on the needs assessment for 2034, things that we need to potentially take a look at, add, changes in the process, stuff like that? Peter?
Yeah, again, I guess if you look at the requirements of the pro and the targets that the pro has, I don't necessarily know if these fit with those requirements. So the pro is required to meet a greenhouse gas goal. The pro is required to meet PCR requirements. The pro is required to meet waste reduction. I'm not sure any of these things necessarily fully cover those areas.
And those could potentially be some things that we add in regulation, especially the PCR. That's one of the more driving metrics in this legislation. And since we have the word including in here, that gives us a little bit more latitude to add items to the scope, especially if that's going to be helpful for the pro meeting its goals and whatnot. I should say the producers meeting their goals. All right, any other questions on the needs assessment language? All right, moving on. This is talking about the fund right here, which is our fund, not the fund that the pro is holding. Okay, now we're getting into definitions, which is probably where a lot of our conversation is going to be around. So, Advisory Council, beverage container. We can go through these. I can scroll through these, and I'll just look for hands and comments and stuff like that. All
Brad,
right.
can you make it a little bit wider again, please?
Yeah, I can do that. All right, any comments on the term beverage container? Okay. Brand owner. Composting facility are actually referenced here. I don't have those on hand. Maybe Shannon or Sarah, would you be able to put those definitions in the chat for folks? And then we can get back to those if people have comments on them. Okay. Covered entity. So Sarah already touched on 3 through 5. We also have 1 and 2 right here. And again, someone pointed out that this has the word including right here. Is there anything that needs to be clarified? Do we need to expand on any of these, anything like that? Peter?
Yeah, obviously, I think we talked about public buildings, so I'll just, yeah. What is it? What is it?
And what is
Include?
5 right here? And it's owned or operated. So I think you could interpret that being leases and rents, as well.
So that will be a potential issue for operationally. How does, if the state is leasing one floor of a 40-floor building,
Right.
and it's managed by an external company, how does the pro pay the service provider for one floor of 45?
So that's a good point. That's something that we're going to have to take a look at. Do we want to do a mass balance, or those are going to have to be some questions that we have to consider.
And just if it's helpful, I just want to underline, because if the pro is subject to potentially, I think it's $250 in fines, there needs to be a level of accuracy associated with what the pro is doing. So,
yeah, that's, my staff are taking that note down. So that's something that we can definitely take a look at. And again, when we do publish regulations, there's going to be a robust public participation process, and we have to respond to all comments. So, and then we're going to continue to have these meetings as well. So there's going to be lots of opportunities to kind of figure out what this means. All right. Any other comments on covered entity and the sub items?
just as I know we're in the C's, so I'm just going to say the definition, I think, of packaging uses consumer. Sorry, I just got it written down. Uses the word, I think, consumer as to the consumer market. So you may need to define who potentially is the consumer.
Yeah, we can, we got that note down. And you're talking about in accordance with, is there a reference to consumer here, or you're just talking about the packaging definition?
Consumer market is in the packaging definition. So I guess if you're using consumer market, you may need to define what consumer is.
Okay. Yeah, we could definitely do that. All right, moving on. So we have covered entity. Now we're getting into covered materials. Any questions on covered materials?
I don't want to monopolize time, but I think there's certainly a question of what is the difference between a covered material and a durable product.
And is that kind of like the example with the drill you were talking about before, or what do you mean by that? Just so that we can.
Like a travel mug. Is a travel mug a product or a package?
Mm-hmm.
Is a gas cylinder that I purchase at a store with nothing in it, is that a package or a product? So you got lots of different examples. Reusable moving boxes, are they a product, or are they a package? What are they?
So
mason jar.
So for example, and just to kind of expand on this, like the mason jars, they come like when you buy them at retail location. Typically, there's, I would say, two forms of packaging on there. There's typically a cardboard box and then some flexible plastic around it. So is what you're asking, do we need to distinguish between those two forms of packaging that are it's a little bit more obvious that they're packaging compared to the product that is inside those two layers? Is that what you're talking about?
Well, I guess you're purchasing them, I guess, as a product. I guess the question is, they are potentially a reusable a form of packaging. So are they caught or are they not? Similar, you could buy a plant in a really nice ceramic pot that you potentially are going to reuse that pot. Is that ceramic pot a package, or is it a product?
No, that's a good point. And that might not necessarily apply to paper products that are packaged, because we do have a separate definition for paper products. But it sounds like it might be a little bit more relevant for some of the other materials too, as well. So yeah, the more examples that we can get, we can put those. I mean, we're going to be developing a fact sheet off of this. If it's something that we need to put in regulation, we'll be further expanding with guidance. All of that is going to help. And just so you know, when we've been doing our retail, not field trips, they're work trips, these are the same questions that we're coming up against. And we're seeing, is that a package? Is that not a package? So, or is that the product itself? Because when you go to, those are definitely some things that we're looking at. Who was next in line?
Not sure.
Scott, I think you were.
Okay. I was just gonna speak to some of Peter's questions. If it doesn't have anything in it and it's empty, is it a packaging product, right? So the canning jar, ball jar, if you will, a purse, a beach tote, those things are empty, but then, are used by the consumer over and over again. I don't know that those were intended as packaging because there's no product in it when it's sold. However, you're right. The secondary packaging that comes along with it is it gets delivered, but then that's not ever going to the box that it comes in, maybe packaging, but the case that it comes in that is emptied at the retailer before it gets on the shelf is never getting to the residential stream, so that's not going to be covered.
Yeah, I
think typically there's something about having a product in the thing when it's sold.
And so the example we actually, I'll just bring up one example. So we went to a retail store and there was a pallet of bricks there. And so it had one, the pallet, and then two, there were like these plastic bands around. So the question that we had, does that ever get to the customer? So we actually asked if you could buy, if a customer could buy this pallet of bricks by pallet, and the answer, at least in that case, was yes. So then does that mean it's going to, that is packaging for personal non-commercial use? So again, these are just some of the things that we're going to have to grapple with and put in regulation. And again, there's going to be plenty of opportunities to comment and provide input and feedback in this process. William, question.
Yeah, I know along those same lines, and you kind of, I understand what you meant by the prior, but like I'm looking at like items like molded fiber and possible tins, where they're almost the intentional seasonal impact is that you are leveraging these things over and over again. How does that play a role in this legislation as well? as to whether it's a package or not, or considered a package or not.
It's a good point. Definitely. All right. And then again, we will be distributing these notes out after this, or we'll post it on our website, which we've been doing with the previous meetings. So if there's anything that we missed or need to clarify from the conversation, just let us know and we can make sure that gets added to it as well. Did I see another hand raised, or was it a comment? So I see Martha, you had a comment?
My comment was actually on the previous discussion. Well, I had a comment about the language, including but not limited to, meaning that because it talks about households and consumers, that commercial entities could also be concluded as covered entities under that broader interpretation of including. And then, yeah, actually a whole bunch of very good questions. That's what happens when you walk in a store. You see exactly. That's why I'm so glad that you're doing this. I mean, when this is all over, maybe we should all go to some stores and make sure that we can identify exactly what packaging is. As an exercise, this is a very, very complicated. But there's boxes of stuff that are that has the product is packaging, and I'm not really. I mean, a household would use it as packaging.
And just to Martha, your second point on there, a box of plastic wrap. So the box is definitely a package. I think that's pretty clear. I think what you're saying is, or asking, the plastic wrap can be used as packaging, but is it a product that is packaged? And again, that's really going to be a lot of what we need to define in this.
I was also wondering whether boat shrink wrap would be covered somehow by this legislation. It's packaging that's put around a boat annually.
I know we've definitely, and not in the context of this legislation, we've definitely had lots of we've had some conversations with DNR, specific Department of Natural Resources on plastic wrap and stuff like that. So it's definitely something that we're looking at. Again, not necessarily in the context of this, but we've talked about that. But it's an interesting question, and we got the note down.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. Moving on. Oh, I did see that Chaz had his hand raised.
Yeah, just a thought. It seems to me like some of these examples are so deliciously trivial. A pallet of bricks. I don't know how many consumers buy a pallet of bricks. I haven't done it in the last 10 or 30 years. And I'm worried you're all going to start focusing on the minors and what amounts to trivia and not focusing on the majors. And you're going to end up in some deliciously Talmudic discussions over what is indeed a packaging. So my only comment is I hope you all really concentrate on common sense and concentrate on what really is covered at the local level by local government programs and not get wrapped up in chasing small stuff. That's all.
Yeah, and it's a good point. And on the majors, like that, coming up with that list was relatively easy because we had the other states to look at. But again, this isn't necessarily limited to items that are readily recyclable. It's all packaging and paper products. So that's something.
I understand that, but the states are already having some trouble on defining the majors.
Yeah.
as our good friends in Maine are discovering and other places. So if the majors are difficult, the minors are going to be far more difficult.
Mhm.
And sooner or later, you got to exercise some common sense and concentrate on what really matters. I'm saying this partially for y'all's mental health.
All right. Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely something we could take a look at. We have that noted. Martha?
I was just adding something in the chat here.
Okay.
You mentioned easily recyclable stuff, or maybe Chaz did. I think our ultimate goal is that we need to make sure that packaging is reusable or recyclable, period, and not, exclude stuff that's not recyclable or
And that-
reusable.
And that's what the goals are intended to
Right.
do, is
Right.
to promote a more circular economy, whether that's through reuse or recycling.
But
So
the goal
it's
is not perfection. And if our goal is perfection, you're never going to reach it. I want a program that works. I don't want to just keep tripping over minor little details that are blocking getting this program to work.
I see a hand raised by Shoshana. Just a clarification. If you want to, are you representing someone who is on the council?
Hi, Bradley. We emailed about this. I'm filling in for Abby right now.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right. Yeah.
I just wanted to note that I think it's important to realize the scope of this EPR bill. Like, for example, in Minnesota, they have an entirely separate EPR bill for things like boat shrink wrap.
Mhm.
There are different mechanisms to ensure that those products that need to have a better responsibility for them, they might not be best suited under one large, expansive EPR bill. It could be better for them to have something that's more tailored and specific, like a separate EPR bill, instead of trying to lump it in with everything under this specific one.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Mhm.
Okay. Moving on. Covered material type. Any questions on that? All right.
Sorry, Bradley, just a
Yeah, go ahead.
late hand. Not a question, just a note that sometimes plastics gets divided into rigids and flexibles and, things like that.
Yeah, and we've definitely noticed that in the other states covered materials list. They're breaking that down into a little bit more granular detail. So,
yeah.
All right. Cool. Covered services. Any questions on that? Peter?
Yeah, it's just more, I don't really know what a waste reduction service or reuse service necessarily is. What it might be helpful to understand what those potentially would include.
Yeah, I think we can, so I guess the question for the group is, do other states have this language and how are they thinking about it?
So this is new to, Minnesota has it. I think Washington has it, but no state that's further past really has details on this as a covered service.
And I think Minnesota is a year ahead of us. Have they addressed this?
No.
Okay. All right.
They do have a definition of waste reduction in their plan or in their, so That's at least a starting point. But
So if it, I guess the question is, if an entity or service was for waste reduction, is that eligible for, I should say, waste reduction of the covered materials, not all materials? Is that eligible for reimbursement?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Scott, you had a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to agree with Peter. I mean, it's been added in a couple places. The one note here is that composting is also going to be something that needs a lot of attention. Colorado had some composting elements, but really more about what's compostable and not compostable. I don't think Peter, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think the pro is actually responsible for the composting collection system. It's more about what's compostable packaging, and so I think that's going to be something that we need to sort out. No pun intended.
Good one, Scott.
Sorry.
All right. Okay, any other questions on covered services? There's this education component down here as well as a part of the definition.
That's common.
Okay.
I mean, every state's got the pro needs to educate folks about what's new in the recycling system and have a alignment across the state.
Well, so we had this conversation, I believe, in January, where what is the education that the pro is providing and what is the education that, let's say, counties are providing. And Peter, I remember you bringing up it should be the role for the pro to educate the producers. But I guess there's certainly going to be more entities out there that are educating consumers, and that's consumers or even the MRFs or the haulers. So there's going to be a few different areas where you can see education, and it might be tailored to that particular part of the value stream. But so that's something that we're going to have to grapple with as well. Like what education is included in the covered service?
I think that's the same as every state. I don't think that's different.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Moving down. De minimis producer. Any questions on that one that we need to clarify in regulation? And again, this says global gross revenue. I know I forgot who brought it up, but that was a question that was brought up as well. All right. Environmental impact. Okay. What about exempt materials? I'm actually not expecting any comments on this one right here. That was a joke. But any questions, comments on exempt materials? Anything that we need to clarify in regulation?
Maybe
Okay.
if you keep scrolling.
Yeah,
keep-
yeah, I'm sure there will be
Towards
some.
the end of the list, I think there may be more questions.
Yeah. And I think these are very similar to Minnesota's exemptions.
Oh, it looks pretty standard.
So this was actually a question that came up. And this is more in our paint care context. Maryland did pass the paint care law, but it's not necessarily tailored to paint packaging. It's tailored to the product that's in packaging. So I think that's where this is specific to the packaging, although that law is not necessarily addressing the packaging. So I think we just need to figure out what we're going to do with that, because I do know in some states there are goals for paint care to have recycling goals associated with the packaging. So, but it might not necessarily be a conversation in this group right here. Okay. So 13 and 14. Sarah already talked a little bit about 13 right here, and I did, whoops, I didn't want to do that. I did make a mention to 14 right here. Any questions on the exemption 13? And again, just on this is more related to paper products. If it's a paper product, the question that we have is, does this exemption apply? Because that paper product is going to have packaging around it. But this exemption is specific to containing a product. So it's not necessarily, it may not apply to the product itself, especially since we have an expanded program that looks at paper products. That's something that we've been looking at. And then not introduced to a person other than the commercial or business entity that first received the product. Okay. No questions or comments on those? Okay. Let's take a look at exemption 14 right here. Peter, you did mention some packaging types, like packaging that's used to package a drill, for example, and is stored in there. Are there any other types of packaging that you can think of that might fall under this?
Yeah, I mean, this has been in sort of an area that's been exempt for quite a while, and some other areas tends to include things like puzzle boxes or board game boxes, potentially like a record cover or whatever, cassette cover, that type of thing. Not that we have those anymore, but those types of things that are going to be, products, durable products that are going to be stored for a lengthy period of time.
Peter, can I just ask a specific question on this? This is Shannon, sorry.
Yep.
So are you referring to predominantly materials that have no electronics relation whatsoever and are much more, I don't want to say outdated because I'm definitely dating myself when I say that, but like outdated materials that are covered for a long period of time that have no electronic or technical inclusion? Like there's no electronic component, therefore it can have that longer storage.
Well, it could be an electronic, right? Like the power drill or power saw, you're likely gonna use that saw for years. So you're gonna have a hardcover case that you carry to use that saw wherever you go. So I think it would include potentially, potentially electronics as well.
Okay, thank you.
So, but there's always going to be little things of like, is it a package or is it a product, right? Like, arguments have been made for years around like a toner cartridge. Is that a product or a package? Is a lighter a product or a package? And there's lots of decisions that have been made in lots of other jurisdictions around those types of materials.
Chaz, go ahead.
Just to follow up on Peter's comment, I would urge the department to err on the side of rationality and simplicity. I find the idea of a toner card as a package or something that you carry a chainsaw in as a package to be well beyond the intent of the legislation. And I think the quest for perfection is just going to utterly fail. And drive you all a little crazy in the process.
All of these things we're working through. Not all of them need to be dealt with in regulation. Many of them times we're working through just with the regulators on those types of materials.
Yeah, and ultimately the department's going to approve the plan, but that's 3 years out though. But if there's things that we can put in regulation to help with provide some clarity, we certainly want to do that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only caution, Bradley, is always the unintended consequences that come with putting something in a regulation versus can it be defined in the plan, which is a little easier to amend, or potentially guidance materials again, which are easier to amend as well.
Yeah, understood. Okay. Local government. I don't think I'll move on. Okay, the packaging definition. Again, we talked a little bit about this in our presentation at the beginning, and what some potential differences between our needs assessment and what's included here. Any questions, comments on the definition of packaging? I do want to note that packaging is for personal, non-commercial use right here, but it does include primary, secondary, and tertiary packaging also. So I know in our conversations, the definition, like what is tertiary packaging, had a lot of questions on what exactly that means.
So I mentioned consumer market, and maybe you'd say that that's covered by personal, non-commercial in part 2. I mean, I think the big issue is going to be, because this is including both reusable, refillable, and single-use packaging, it's going to be that differentiation between what is captured and what isn't, because this definition obviously doesn't deal with that. So durable product versus not. What type of bag is included, and what kind of bag is not included. As an example, you're going to have reusable, lots of different types of reusable bags, but which ones are actually included and which ones aren't.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah, moving on. Peter, I remember a comment from you. I think this might have been November, December timeframe. Most states are treating this as food serviceware right here. Is that your experience in some of the other states?
Well, some states define food service packaging. Most of them, if they're including serviceware like utensils and straws, they specifically call that out as food serviceware. So I guess you probably need a definition of what is food service packaging.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we have that note down. Cool. Thank you. All right. And then beverage containers are included, but beverage containers was already defined above. Okay. Paper products. Any questions on this definition? Things that we may need to clarify. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, Bradley. I'm hoping to get some clarity on whether paper products, as it's defined now, will be that are managed through the commercial streams will be in scope or not. And if they are, I feel like they are being held to a different standard than what is applied to packaging, as is currently written in the bill.
Yeah, and thank you for that. And I do remember that email now. In my mind, I had the gentleman that was testifying was going to be replacing Abby, but yeah, thank you for that comment. So for the definition of paper products, it doesn't necessarily have, if we go back to the definition of packaging, it's not necessarily constrained to personal, non-commercial use. So the question here is do paper products that are not packaging, that are sold to commercial entities, are those in scope? Is that your question?
Yes.
So for example, let's say you have reams of paper, 500 sheets of paper. Typically each 500 sheets is wrapped around in typically a foldable, it's oftentimes paper packaging, and then they come in, they typically come in cardboard boxes, at least the ones that we buy here, and it has like 10 or 12 reams, and each ream is 500. So the question is that paper, and I think this is what you're getting at, the paper, the 500 sheets of paper, is that the packaging or is it the paper product? And again, this isn't, at least this definition isn't explicitly limited to personal non-commercial use.
Yeah, we're hoping to get some clarity on stuff like the reams of paper that goes to a distributor that then goes to a printer. We don't want to make sure that that paper gets sort of double counted throughout its process.
Okay, so if it was, for example, if it was in scope, the question is who's the producer and who pays the fee, I guess, is the question. And Peter, maybe you have a comment, or sorry.
Here, no, Peter, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, separately, you may want to scope this one a little bit. I mean, I don't know, as you're walking through the store, like, are you capturing air filters? Are you capturing paper, filters, like other types of filters that might be in the marketplace? Are you capturing pinatas? Like, as in the scope of what's reasonable, I think this is meant to capture printed publications and stationery. So, yeah.
I think we also want to clarify that for things like printing and writing paper, before, when it is sold as in store as blank paper, that is not a package. It is only once it gets taken to a distributor, we have no idea where the product ends up and it is then used. I think there needs to be a distinction between those things. And also we need to think about things like paper that goes to an office building and is then processed by a commercial hauler. There's a lot of distinctions for the paper life cycle that I think are not properly covered in the scope at the moment.
Yeah, that's, and then we've heard junk mail as well. Like, those are some other things that we have heard about in these conversations as well. Is that in scope? Is that not in scope? Yeah, I think this is definitely one we need to clarify in regulation. But again, just want to point out that unlike the packaging definition, it's not necessarily limited to personal non-commercial use. So that could potentially mean a little bit broader application of this.
And I think that comes down to the crux of it, is that it does not feel materially neutral to have that sort of designation for paper, but not for any other packaging material type.
Yeah, and certainly understand the viewpoint there. I should note, when we did our needs assessment, paper, when we're just looking at the waste sort, paper as a broad category, so this is all types of paper, is close to like 26% of the waste stream. It's as high as food residuals in our waste stream. And folks have heard me say this in the past as well. We only have 22 years of constructed landfill capacity. We do have some more permitted capacity, but it's not built yet. And it is really, at this point, just servicing, when it does get built, will service the DC area. At least in the state of Maryland, we don't necessarily have a bunch of open space, say it's like Colorado does. We're pretty tightly packed here. And that there is that to think about as well.
Perfect. Thanks, Bradley. I think I just have one more point. I know I'm taking up a lot of
you're good.
At the moment. I think we certainly don't want paper going into the landfill. We want to make sure that we recover as much of it as possible. But I think in bringing up the needs assessment, we also saw in the data that was in the needs assessment, there was that $0 net cost for commercial paper and OCC. So I just want to make sure that the needs assessment is properly informing this regulation, as I think its original intention was.
And so given that, and I think you're referencing, and I might be wrong, the some of the data as a part of the interviews. I could be wrong on that. Paper from residential and commercial is a significant proportion of the waste stream, even though some commercial businesses are source separating that out. I think there was a question or a hand. I heard something, maybe not. Okay. Getting on to the definition of producer. Any questions on this? And again, I think we took a very similar approach to Minnesota on this. Any questions on the what a producer does not include? All right. Yes, Shoshana, is that how you say it? Sorry.
Yeah, Shoshana, it's perfect. I was just hoping you could give some clarity on the mill exemption language in the producer definition.
So you're talking about 4, right? Right here?
Yes.
Okay. So a mill that uses any virgin wood fiber in the products it produces. Yeah, on that one in particular, when this was, I don't remember this coming up necessarily in the conversation we had with Augustine. Did you have any conversations with the bill sponsor on that, or just want to take a look at that or get your thoughts on that? And maybe Scott, you have some comments on that too.
The first and only time I'd ever seen this was in Minnesota, because there's a specific paper mill in a specific district that needed to help get the Minnesota bill across the finish line. You know, I think some of us even questioned, but far be it from me. I don't know if there's any paper mills in Maryland. Perhaps there are, but I don't know that paper mills have ever been a producer, because it's not, a consumer is not getting any of the product directly from the paper mill. But I have no idea why. You know.
Yeah, I think we might have to reach out to Minnesota on this in particular, and just to take a look at that. Martha, I think you had a comment too. What was your comment?
Yeah, no, my comment is that we said in our recommendations to Senator Augustine that this is, this is a danger of just importing something from another state without looking at it more closely. This is clearly something that was an agreement with one of the stakeholders in Minnesota. It doesn't have any particular relevance to Maryland as far as we can see. And we said that we didn't think that should be included, that exemption should be included. But it didn't, we were so hurried, right? We were just rushed to finish it. But it may not have any relevance to anyone in Maryland, for all we know. But it was clearly some specific request from a stakeholder to get the bill through, as Scott said.
Yeah, so we're well, our team can reach out to Minnesota, get a little bit more insight on that, and yeah, it sounds like we might have to clarify this, or it might not be as it sounds like it might not necessarily be relevant in the state of Maryland.
This is a lesson across all different kinds of bills. You know, each one adds their own, they import something else and then they add their own specific exemptions, and then someone else copies your bill and thinks, and it ends up with a lot of silly things. So thanks for recognizing that.
Why would the producer have to be located in Maryland?
It doesn't, but tell me a circumstance where a paper mill is delivering product. I mean, where a consumer's getting product directly from a paper mill that's going to hit the residential stream without going through a couple other steps of conversion into a pack. I mean,
Depends on how integrated the mill is.
I know where it came from. I was present during the debate of where it came from. It came from a specific district in Minnesota that was the swing district for the bill. So that's all I'm saying. It doesn't matter. It's in law now. So, but
Bismarck and sausages and making law.
Yep.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments on what a producer does not include? Okay, just a time check. It is 10:35, and I just want to make sure we'll probably go maybe another 15, 20 minutes, and then we can open it up to public comment, and then adjourn this. But just want to make sure that we're keeping the time in mind. Okay. Any other questions? Now, these were already in law right here. These exemptions from Senate Bill 222. Any questions on those? Okay. All right. Okay, now we're getting into the producer responsibility plan. And then the definition of recycling. This looks familiar. Any questions, comments on this definition right here? And maybe things that we need to clarify in regulation. I know the question that came up in our conversations had to do with this alternative daily cover. So the question was, is this just specific to EPR or this legislation or this program? Because currently we do count alternative daily cover as a form of recycling in the state of Maryland, and the counties can count that towards their recycling rates. But if it's not recycling for the purposes of this this law, it might not count towards the recycling rate, the goals that are listed later in this, but may still apply for the state's recycling rates. Scott, you had a question or comment?
yeah, I mean, I thought we discussed this rather thoroughly
Yeah.
in previous meetings, that there is alternative daily cover that some counties use that is not packaging cover. It's for this law. It's for the reimbursement of services. Alternative daily cover is not recycling, just like waste to fuel is not recycling. I thought that's been pretty well. I think that the legislature took that fairly well from the discussions that we had at the advisory board, and that MDE submitted to the Senate during the stakeholder process. That does not keep counties from using alternative daily cover for other things that aren't covered here. And if you still want to call it recycling, but you know, not for the purposes of reimbursement under the producers should be paying to get material back, not for daily cover and landfill.
Yeah, that's how I recall the conversation going. All right. Angie?
Yeah, so I think there should be just a little bit more clarity on, yes, kind of what Scott had just mentioned of if it's going to be covered under this or not. Like they can still do it. It just won't be, you know, you can't take advantage of the funds, because I think certain entities will still want to use it as alternative use.
And then I guess the question is, can it still be counted towards the MRA recycling rate?
Correct.
Although it won't be reimbursable.
Correct. Yeah, I think there needs to be some clarification on that, maybe.
Well, I don't really want to. We'll file our comments when the reg is open to the public comment. If you start using glass that's recovered in this program as daily cover when it can be recycled in the state, I mean, that's a huge miss from the counties.
Maybe if I can just so again, I go back to, if the pro is responsible to hit recycling targets, there's a target set for glass, and municipalities decide to continue to use it as annual daily cover, and we don't meet our target, we're responsible then. So you're holding us potentially to a target that we have no ability to control. So I just want to flag it, because that is a potential concern.
I mean, it's incredible that we're still having the discussion about whether daily cover is recycling. It's just, it's diversion, and there's multiple things. Plus, it's not even a great cover for landfill. There's multiple studies that show that, you know, it's not even a great daily cover. There are things that are used as daily cover that aren't great as even performing daily cover. I cannot imagine that we're still, plus it's not recycling, and it adds to the confusion and the frustration that the residents of Maryland have with, you know, not trusting the recycling system.
Well, I will say some of, you know, it is used also not just daily. I understand what you're saying, but road reclamation and other things like that. So I just mean,
again, I
think about everything and all the different entities within.
This raises an interesting question, Scott. You said not usable for recycling, and would glass fault be considered recycling?
I'm sorry, what's glass fault?
The use of glass in pavement. It was very popular in Baltimore at one point.
I don't want to take the whole group down the glass path more than anybody wants to either. There's an opportunity to get it to end markets that can put it back into packaging.
Yep.
The state should take advantage of that now that it has an EPR system, it has processors in the state of Maryland, and it has end markets within reachable distance of the processors in Maryland.
Scott, so you're saying essentially the only thing you're consider recycling for glass is back in other containers?
No, not at all. Fiberglass, there's multiple end markets for recycled glass that are naturally come through the fact that you return it to the supply chain. But if you're putting it in a hole in the ground or covering a hole in the ground or using it to line the roads of the landfill, that's not recycling.
But it is being processed and taking the place of a raw material that would have had to been put there if the glass was not used, which by definition is recycling.
It's not being processed. How's it being processed?
Sure it is. Sure it is. I don't see, if you dig up any landfill, any ADC, any road base, I challenge you to find a whole Coke bottle down there that has not been pulverized and processed and crushed so it could be used as that material.
I'm sorry, Dave. Processing glass to clean it up, to get it to an end market, does not include just crushing it in amongst all the other commingled materials that are contaminating the glass stream.
In this
That's
case,
what's going as daily cover.
We define this is a form of processing. It may not be the processing you're referring to, but it is the processing of the material glass.
You have plenty of other glass that isn't packaging glass.
That's
You've got
not
flat
that's
glass. You've got
not,
windshields
that's
and stuff
not
like that.
that is not the issue here. Whether there are other options is not the issue. You know, you can't. You're diverting it from what I'm saying is that it may not be what you define as processing, but that process by which that material is made usable in those situations is the processing of glass.
I
that
think we need to take that conversation. I mean, it's just not considered.
Yeah,
I don't even know how to continue to. If it's going into a landfill, it's not recycling.
If it would be a whole Coke bottle in a landfill, I totally agree with you.
Even if it's a crushed Coke bottle.
But that is once you start crushing it and making it as so it can replace the raw material, it has been processed. Whether it's the definition.
So if it's a ground up
different.
plastic bag, it's also in a landfill. That's also recycling.
I don't know where that's
A
happening.
shredded plastic bag, it's also recycling if it's in a landfill.
I don't.
I
know
think
where
for the
that's
sake
happening.
of time, guys, I think for the sake of time, everyone has great points, and I think the passion is wonderful. I love it. But I think Bradley and I are on the same page that for the sake of time, we might need to move forward, and then maybe we discuss this at a later time, Bradley, if we want to have further discussions internally or as a group who wants to be involved. But again, I love the conversation. I'm sorry for maybe opening a can of worms. I just wanted to, I don't say much, so I wanted to kind of put something out there. Feeling, but thank you guys. And I apologize for cutting everyone off. I really do. Everyone, I love the comments. It's great.
We're going to have to reconcile the different definition of recycling that is in 17. I think it's 1701. But Stephanie, you had a question or comment?
I was just, Angie took care of, she said what I was going to say.
All right. Delphine?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say, I think the bottom line is, there's recycling, there's upcycling, there's downcycling, right? And if we go too far into downcycling, then there's a moment where, I don't know, and I don't want to get into that debate of when it's getting too far. But if we go too far into downcycling, then we're losing the environmental value of what we're trying to do and the economic value of what we're trying to do. And if we go back to the objective of that bill, it's to have an environmental impact and an economic impact. So I think this is pretty much the line that we should draw is, when is recycling achieving those objectives? Just a point of consideration.
Yeah, it's definitely something that we're going to have to reconcile. Okay. Recycled covered material. Any questions on that? Recycling rate? Peter?
Sorry, Bradley, I just had a quick question before. I know we're running out of time before public comment. So can I just ask on the question of, I know we talked about the timeline before, but we didn't talk about, is CAA the pro under the legislation, or is there a process to establish the pro under the legislation? That would be helpful for us to know just what's next on that.
Yeah. So we're considering CAA the pro. We did an application under SB222, and I think it was to represent the needs of the producers was the language in Senate Bill 222, and developing a plan on behalf of the producers would be representing the needs of the producers. So I think that's we're considering CAA to be the pro there, but there is a process to potentially add other pros in as well.
Okay. Okay, and before we go to questions, so like I've written down a bunch of, I think, where definitions may be needed. I think there's a bunch of areas in the law. I mean, we talk about a redemption rate, we talk about existing infrastructure. We're getting questions in other jurisdictions. What is existing? As of what date is it existing? So we're getting some questions on that. There's some terms like covered service method. I mean, probably you can read into it, but there may be areas like that that are worthwhile for the regulation to provide some more description on.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on. So we have refill right here. Or were there any comments on recycling rate? All right. Responsible in market. Return rate. So Martha, I think you had a comment. If MDE has the discretion to set some targets in regulation that are not in statute. So in the plan part of that's something that we're going to have to take a look at. In the plan, there is a reference there that that we can add anything else asked for by the department. I mean, that's not exactly what it says, but that's the general phrasing of that. So we'll have to take a look at if that language gives us latitude to add goals into the plan or into regulation. But that's something that we're still looking at. Chaz?
Yeah, just to get back to responsible in market, at the recent plastic recycling conference held in Maryland in March, the head of one of the largest plastic recycling companies in America noted that his company is now required to fill out data and other sheets and constant reporting to be considered a responsible end market that his virgin competitors don't need to pay to do. So I would urge you to not make responsible end market into an anchor for recycling.
Got it. Yeah, that's a good point. All right. Return rate. I think we already talked about that one. Reuse.
Sorry. The return rate. Sorry. No, I was thinking about the reuse rate. Sorry, my apologies.
Yeah, no, go ahead. I mean, I was moving on to reuse. You're talking specifically about reuse rate, not reuse, although they might be related.
Yeah. So I guess, and again, I mentioned already, I'm not quite sure I fully get the difference between durable product and reusable covered material. But the reuse rate, I guess the question is, based on this definition, then is the, do we need to measure units? So does that mean we need to measure units for every single use package that's put into the marketplace? I'm just trying to understand what's meant by the share of units of reusable covered material. So does that mean we need to measure, every producer needs to provide absolute units to us for the packaging of products that they put into the marketplace?
So what you're saying, what is a unit? And that needs to be defined in regulation.
Yeah, I'm assuming we need to get from each of those companies the amount of reusable covered material that they put into the marketplace, and then the denominator then is I'm just trying to figure out what is meant.
And I would suspect that there's a lot of producers that are that are de minimis producers in this case. We're still going to have to figure out like what exactly that is, because the rate, I think, is what you're getting at. It presumes there's a numerator and a denominator. It's something over some unit of time or mass or whatever it is. So yeah. So I guess like if you have a reusable coffee cup that can be used 500 times as it compared as a single use coffee cup, like what's the rate for that? Or generally how much are those reusable coffee cups getting reused? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, I think I just don't understand, based on the definition, what the equation is, and what do I need for inputs to be able to measure it?
Right. Yes, that makes sense. We have that note down. All right. Service provider. And then I think we're only really going to have enough time to get through the definitions for this meeting. Chaz?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I forgot to take my hand down.
No, it's all good. It's all good. All right. So thank you for the robust discussion. I'm going to turn it over to the public. Do we have any comments from the public on SB 901? Is there anything that we need to clarify in regulation? Anything like that? Andrew?
Yeah, I just was going to ask the slides from the earlier presentation today. Will those be released? The timeline's particularly helpful as we try to look through implementation.
Yeah, it will. And just we're required to post it online. So, and I can make sure that this group has. And I see Shannon has already. She has the gift of foresight. Posted that link in this chat right here.
Okay, thanks.
And that has so that's an EPR page in general. So it has some of our other EPR programs on there. But it's I mean our big one is the packaging and paper products EPR. And it has all of our public meeting notes, presentations that we've had had from previous meetings as well. So, Ellie.
Hi, Ellie Ventura from World Centric.
Yes.
And I'm just looking for clarification in section O, which is page 14. line 20, and if molded fiber is going to be defined within paper products. And then my other question is in section S, page 18, if composting, how composting will or will not fit into the definition of recycling? That was all. Thanks.
Yeah. So we got that note down. So just in general, composting is a form of organics recycling, and we do count it as recycling. I guess the question is, for this, composters are going to be receiving a lot more material that is not, let's say, packaging or paper products. They could be receiving food residuals as well. So in terms of what's applicable for this law, it would be and the reimbursements and stuff like that, it would be limited to what is going to help promote the diversion of packaging and paper products that are compostable.
Great, thank you.
And that kind of brings up another question that we're going to have to grapple with as well. If you have a depackager, what does that mean? You're technically, or you're very likely screening out the packaging. So does that, and it's not being diverted in a lot of cases. So what does that mean in terms of recycling rates and stuff like that? So that's some feedback that we have received that we're going to have to address. All right. Well, it is 11 o'clock, ending right on time. Just want to thank everyone for this conversation. As I said before, we have a pretty good start on the covered materials list. It wasn't necessarily ready for distribution this meeting, but we're hoping that we can have something for this group to comment on in future meetings pretty soon. All right. Well, thank you very much, and we will see you in June.